All right, so we're going to talk about rounding in general, and we're going to talk some specifics about tenths and hundredths today. But let's just review the basic steps for rounding, which we've all practiced from time to time, but it deserves a little refresher. So remember, the first thing is you want to find the correct place value spot for rounding. So if they say tenth or hundredth or hundred or 1,000 or a million or penny, or a dollar or whole number, you got to know what that spot actually is. So we're going to make sure we got to review that first. All right. As long as you can know that, it's pretty simple. Because then you look at the next door neighbor, the one directly on the right, and that tells you everything, right? Remember, if it's less than 5, there's no change in that place. But if it is 5 or greater than 5, you increase that place by 1. Right. So let's look at some specific examples about this. All right, so let's first review place values, right? So again, you should see here that we got all those ones on the left, ones in black, those are the whole numbers, the ones before the decimal. And then the red, there are the decimals. And notice the tenths is always the first place after the decimal. Remember, those are your dimes. Dimes are 10 cents. They're a tenth of a dollar. That's why that's the dimes. And the 2, that's the hundredths, because remember, there's 100 pennies in a dollar. So that's where your pennies are, right? So there's your hundredths place right there. So we're going to kind of go through this today, and we're going to focus, like we said, on the tenths and the hundredths. So again, you can see I'm going to focus in a little bit, and we're going to talk today first about that tenths place. And remember, when we start rounding, in order to decide on the tenths place, you have to look at the neighbor on the right. That is the hundredths place. All right, so let's do some mixed examples right here of rounding to the nearest tenth. All right, so the first thing I do is I highlight my tenths place, right? That's my place that I know is going to change or stay the same based on my neighbor on the right. And there I have the 4. But that 4, as we can see, is less than 5, which means that 8 is not going to change. It's going to stay the same, and everything else goes to 0. But remember, after the decimal, those zeros are more writing than we need, not as simple as we like. So that just goes right there to 0.8 right there. So that is rounded to the nearest tenth. Let's try one more example. Right here, again, it doesn't matter that it's 57.472. All that matters is that tenths place. That's what's going to change or stay the same based on his neighbor on the right there, the 7. But that 7 is more than 5, right? It's 5 or more, so that's, again, greater than 5. So that 4 has to change. It has to go up 1. And everything else, like before, goes to 0. And there is our final answer, 57.5. We don't need those extra zeros out there. I'm just showing that step so you realize that those zeros are really there because it gets rounded to the nearest tenth, and that's what remains, is something in the tenths place. Let's take a look at the next now, the hundredths place. Right, remember, that's that second place after the decimal. And remember, we have to look at the thousandths, the one right next to it, in order to determine how we're going to round that hundredths place. So let's take a look at that now. A couple of examples here. Here we go. We highlighted the hundredths place. Remember, that's the place that's going to either change or stay the same based on his friend right there, the 6 right next door. And since that 6 is 5 or more, then that means that highlighted 1 is going to change to 2. So it rounds up based on the neighbor, the 6. And again, we get rid of those zeros at the end, and we've rounded to the nearest hundredths place. It's the same thing as asking rounded to the nearest penny, right? Or when we're talking about money right there, that's how you round money. All right, so let's try one more example. Again, a bigger number, but that doesn't matter. Highlight the hundredths place, the second place after the decimal. We look at the neighbor to the right, and again, that is now, it's not 5 or more. It's actually less than 5, which means that 7 is not going to change. Everything else goes to 0. Everything else, notice, remains the same. The 784 didn't change. The 0.2 didn't change. Just that 7 could either change or stay the same. It stays the same in this case. Everything else goes to 0. But again, we don't really need those. So there's our final answer. So there's a little review on rounding to the nearest tenth and rounding to the nearest hundredth. All right, so please be careful of your place value out there. It makes a huge, huge difference.